let people come in for a couple minutes, and then we're going to start very, very shortly. Hi, Joanne. All right, I think we're ready. Just want to make sure I have my screens where they need to be. All right, everyone. Hi. Thank you for joining us today. We are back with the mid-career conversations. And today we're going to be focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, as competitive advantage, featuring our storyteller, Julia Satov. My name, and some of you may know me from last series, some of you may not, but my name is Zeynep Gudar-Tuck, and I am so lucky and proud that I get to volunteer my time to host today's conversation. It's one that's very close to my heart and very close, I'm truly believe in it, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But as this event is virtual, and since we are not gathered all on the same space, I recognize the following land acknowledgement might not necessarily be for the territory that you're currently on. If this is the case, please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. We will be putting the website, that's a great resource for you to check out. It's native-land.ca, and we'll put that in the chat for you to reference. So as a member of the York University community, I recognize many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University itself. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, the Mid-Career Conversations series was created with alumni like you in mind, myself in mind too. For us to come together, this is a really great opportunity for us to come together as York alumni to connect, hear each other's stories, experiences of other alumni, ask questions, share your journey, your ambitions. So first, let me share a little bit about me. For those who benefit from visual descriptions, I am a woman with shoulder-length hair, a dark red sweater, and dark Middle Eastern features. I am a fellow York U alumni. I received my BA a million years ago. I think it's back in 2002, and I did comms and sociology. I'm a Turkish Canadian producer and writer, and for over 20 years, I have been producing commercial, digital media, and web series projects for Microsoft News, NBC, Time Out, Chorus Entertainment, and Elevate most recently, a nonprofit that breaks down barriers for underrepresented professionals in the tech community and the tech space in Canada. My content over the years has generated clicks, follows, and views, but also over about $1 million in funds for social and environmental issues that impact our world today. My big focus is on increasing representation in the screen-based media and intersectional gender equity. So you can imagine DEI is something that I care a lot about. I'm very involved with it, and it's in my blood, it's in the core of who I am and what I do. So that I'm very excited about today's conversation, as you can tell. So I'm going to give you a run of the show after all these intros. So our storyteller will be delivering a 20-minute talk. And then afterwards, we'll have some time to kind of get your questions, do a bit of a Q&A. As always, we ask that your questions are relevant and respectful. After the Q&A, we'll stop recording and move into a very popular section of the career conversations, that breakout rooms. So for about 10 minutes, you'll be able to network with fellow alumni, and then we'll return to the main room for final remarks. So this is your chance to kind of let us know where you're tuning in from. I'm tuning in from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and would love if you can use the chat to tell us where you are tuning in from. A few sessions ago, we had someone from India, we had some people from Australia. So I'm trying to go really far this time. So let's see if we can get people from all over. So we can call this a global event. Woo, we got lots. Richmond Hill, Toronto, Hamilton. Oh, we got Montreal. Oh, Mexico. I love this. Look, Markham, Vaughan, Brampton. Brampton's very exciting. Don't say that. I love Brampton. Fergus, North York. Look at this. Stouffville, Aurora. Or Mississauga. We got it all over. Hawaii in your mind. I have Hawaii on my mind as well. You're encouraged. So we're not together today, but to feel like we are kind of in the same room, you're encouraged to turn on your video so that we can see each other and our storyteller can see you. However, no pressure. This is entirely optional. It'll just be, nice. Now, as per Zoom etiquette, we ask you to stay on mute until the Q&A. If you have not done so, you can click the mute button. And if you want a fancy title like mine, you can rename your Zoom screen name with your first, last name, pronouns, degree, and grad year. I realize we have MAs and PhDs in the audience, I'm sure, so try to kind of squeeze it all in there if you can, okay? Now, I think we're on schedule. Without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome our storyteller for today, Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Litera, Julia Satov. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you, Julia? There you are. Yay. Okay. Thanks, Julia. Thank you for taking the time today. We look forward to hearing your story on becoming global DEI leader and how to leverage DEI as a competitive advantage. I think that's the big, right? Everyone's super excited about that. So without further ado, please go ahead and introduce yourself. Take it away, Julia.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zainab. I so love your inclusion of bringing everybody in where they're from. And so thank you, everybody, for sharing. I see 73 people online from different places. Listen, time has become incredibly precious, even more so. And so the idea of taking out time, even in the first 25 minutes, if you can make it, or the breakout sessions afterwards. And so I want to start off with the gratefulness of thank you for your time coming in. I'm going to do my best to storytell. Let's start right away because I want to use that time and talk a little bit about me. Here we go. Can we see that? Can we see that? Perfect. So before I start, a lot of times people ask you to tell a little bit about yourself. And normally, if they're doing the read off of my biography and strategic achievements and life work, I'm always kind of cringing because I feel like I'm very separated from everybody else when we talk about all those things. Because at the end of the day, if what I don't tell you here connects us, then it doesn't matter what I've done. And so you can always go online and see some of the things I've done. I've been in diversity and inclusion for 15 years and the road's been windy. I've taken off 5 years maternity leave, happily raising 2 children, and I have a wonderful partner. And I'm really quite proud of that. So one of the things I want to do is dispel the idea that I'm an expert, because really anybody who knows me, this is really my reality. Just hang on. And when we look at that and the balancing of all these things after COVID and life, I want us to be really looking at this as an opportunity to say, I get that. This is how I feel, right? And one of the things I would like to share, if I do have to express myself and what I am, is I am a learner. I'm constantly trying to learn as much as I can. I'm a practitioner. So what I'm trying to do is put into practice the stuff that I do, which is why if you're a D&I leader or doing D&I work, you do feel like you are hanging off a cliff at times. I am a servant leader. So I am a leader in my role, probably in motherhood as well, seen as that co-leader. But what is the type of leader I am is servant. And I am honored to be called a storyteller today. And with that, I'm going to start this story. It is not from a benevolence. I'm going to read this off just in case anybody has a visual. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Anybody who knows this, Adam Smith, who is considered the father of capitalism, wrote Wealth of Nations in 1776. And this was one of the very prominent quotes that come out of that, which is, it is not for the benefit of society what we do. It is, capital gain is to make money. This is the most simplest form. I know, I think my husband's on here, he's on finance, and he's probably like, it is much more complicated than that. It is. But the idea of supply, demand, and gain is the premise. And if we look at competitive intelligence, as we've worked through the economy and evolutions, we look at how do we become more competitive? But think about this: supply, gain, demand, supply, gain. Now look at this. In 1920, a Johnson & Johnson employee came up with the idea of a Band-Aid. How? Because his wife was getting a lot of nicks in the kitchen. Although it took many iterations for them to get it right, because it was cumbersome, right? The iterations were invested in by Johnson & Johnson because they believed there was a great unmet need. That was in 1920. 2021, 100 years later, Band-Aid launched Our Tone. It was to better blend in with brown skin tones. They launched it on Instagram. And they actually said it was in response to George Floyd. So let me get this straight. 100 years later, it was only now you decided there was a great unmet need. We were talking about Black Wall Street. We're talking about the Black Panthers. We're talking about, even if we look at before the turn of the century, the Emancipation Act. And only now you decided there was a great unmet need. This is revolutionary in terms of thinking. This is something I wrote, that I believe what was once grassroots movements and water cooler conversations has become salient articulations in the principle of capitalism. In other words, what's happening in the social is now becoming on the economic platform. Let's take something else. Think about this way. I'm going to ask you a question. Just think about your mind. If you want to throw it into the chat, fantastic. So between 1901 till 2022, 1901 was the very first. How many Nobel Prize winners was there of individuals? How many do you think? From 1901 to 2022. And I'm not talking the Peace Prize. I'm talking Nobel Prize winners, which is for chemistry and math. Think about it. Just throw a number in. Or have it in your head. So I'm going to tell you this. There were 954 individuals that were awarded the Nobel Prize for either chemistry or math. Wow. How many of the 954 do you think won it twice? Throw it in the chat if you'd like, or think about it. Twice, 954. How many people won it twice? Individuals. I'm going to tell you the number. 4. How many people who've won it twice do you think were women? 1. 1 was a woman. That's her here, Marie Curie. Marie Curie won it both for chemistry and math in 1903 and 1911. She was the first award winner of the 4 to get it. And if we think winning a Nobel Prize is extraordinary, can you imagine how incredible it is to win it twice and be the only woman and the first to have won it twice. Again, 100 years later. Lego launched Female Scientist Series after an online campaign. And this happened around Me Too movement, as you know. This is after 4 waves of feminism of our industrial revolutions. And only now, Lego, you decided there was an unmet need. And this is not really to give companies a tough time. This is great that we're actually moving towards this. But why now? Why now is there such a revolution of such? And I'm going to use this word revolution, so I really want to be able to deconstruct it well for us. Why am I using this particular word? The word evolution refers to the gradual development of changes in something over a period of time. The word revolution means a sudden, complete, or radical turnaround. And I would say we are now in a
but
revolution.
I'm saying, as the person who born you and raised you, and the people who would come to the funeral, they're people who loved her. But for someone to come and be like, oh, you know,
I think someone needs to put it on.
It's like,
put it on mute. Thank you. That seemed much more serious. So you take that call, no problem. And so if we look at it, why am I using the word revolution? Because we are in a revolution. But to me, arguably, we're in our 5th industrial revolution. And if you look at the 5th industrial revolution, the reason why DEI is competitive intelligence is because there's an expectation that business and innovation are connected to purpose and inclusion. Let me tell you a little bit of this winding road. When I started in the legal sector, I chose this picture purposely. It's because I used to watch Law and Order, and I was going to be a badass. I was going to get in there and I was going to make some changes. And getting into the legal sector was really quite challenging. And the reason why is there was a lot of women. You would see the difference, right? We're talking 2000. A lot of women partners. You know what they were doing at times? They were actually sending things to dictate and work as they were about to go into the delivery room. There was an employment lawyer who was a partner who was working on a personal case to fight for paternity rights for her husband. And I was saying, how are we so in a legal system that at times is held by case law and not able to advance? And I realized there was a difference between social justice and legal work. If you look at it now, on the front of websites in the legal field, this is the #1 thing that's on there now. If you look at Baker McKenzie, these are big players. The very first thing is what is happening around the world. Ukraine humanitarian appeal. Diversity, inclusion, equity is becoming competitive intelligence. When I had moved into academia, international education is a really big business. It's where we're able to pull in international students and contribute to the economy, both in knowledge and in labor and resources. It is macroeconomics to microeconomics. And one of the things I was charged to do is I realized education is the route to business. How did I realize that? Learning outcomes. What is it I'm supposed to learn? What is the commitment by a course, right? Or by teachers that I'm supposed to learn? These were the 6 things that we had to internationalize the curriculum with. The struggle to have, at that time, vocational technical teachers want to take this up into their curriculum was, again, a difficulty. They were saying, listen, I'm in the School of Engineering, Technology, and Applied Science. This is a really difficult concept. These are very fluffy terms. Analyze issues of equity at the personal, professional, and global level, #3. Why would I ever need that? And I said, engineers that are going in that have to take the exam, the PE exams, need to know about ethics. I started to make meaning from these arguments and these challenges, even in academia. I had an opportunity to be able to go with a lot of VPs and vice presidents and deans of different organizations around, and it was called Canadian Academic Studying Europe. And there was just little old me, Global Citizenship and Equity Learning Lead. And one of the things that I noticed as we traveled around was I had nothing to share. I had nothing to say when it came to discussing business and discussing academics. I was representing global citizenship equity, but I didn't really have anything to say except one time we were in the University of Zurich. And I said, what if what you're teaching doesn't apply to me? And everybody stopped and looked around. They're like, but you barely say anything. And anybody who knows me, that's radical to think that I don't say anything because I'm always talking. And what I realized, they were like, that is a great question. I said, what you're creating globally doesn't apply to me, doesn't interest me. How do we be competitive? And in that moment, what I realized in all of this, in all of these sectors that I was in, was that I was the revolution. I was the revolution. I was always standing against, not understanding, maybe being out, saying the things that other people are thinking. And then we continue. And I think about this, Herbert Simon, he actually won a Nobel Prize. And he says, human rational behavior is shaped by a scissors whose blades are the structure, task environments, and the computational capabilities of the actor. What does that mean? In order to be able to survive in the workforce, you have to be able to know how to use what you have in the environment you're in. And this is how we are creating our own competitive intelligence. From that, I wrote social impact investing. I was like, if I'm in academia, how am I going to be important to private sector? And I started to write some of the things that I thought were really interesting and cutting edge. Social impact education, right? That was what we were doing. And what I noticed was BMO launched impact investing, not because of what I was writing by any means. It was starting to be cutting edge. How did I start to think about myself as a revolution and write that in there? What are we missing? What are we educating for? I wrote in this that what we're teaching is not enough for the world. When we went into finance, they were already doing it in the banking sector, putting their money where their mouth is. It's not perfect. It's very structured and post-colonial, of course. But what was interesting about it was we were in private sector and it was championing that. And one of the things that I realized if we looked at it was we have a new reality. 48% of Generation Z are racial or ethnic minorities. By 2024, women are expected to make up 47.2% of the workforce. Millennials are 60% more diverse than baby boomers. Groups formerly seen as minorities may reach majority status. That's a number, that's not privilege. Majority status by 2044. And 48% of Gen Z, just so you know, 1 out of 6 Gen Z now have identified as trans or queer, different than 1 out of 10 millennials. We are seeing a whole new world. How do we find ourselves in that to leverage competitive intelligence? So what I'm asking is, what does a revolutionary look like? And I want you to read all of this. That's not even the important part. What the important part is I have never seen and rarely see people put this, which is, I am also an immigrant of mixed race heritage and proud to have lived experience as an equity-seeking community. I'm putting that on there, standing with that, because that is my competitive intelligence. They are now saying, when you look at job descriptions, looking for people with lived experience on underserved communities. So what am I trying to say? In the workforce, you have the opportunity to learn and to educate when you start an employee resource group, when you start a committee, when you start an association. I have both privilege and the experiences of marginality. I am the hybrid talent workforce. And right now, when they look at 12% of the workforce that is hybrid, is more difficult to replace. That's having social intelligence, right? How do you have competitive intelligence? Is understanding who you are and how you're leveraging that. Start a club, right? Get the collective together. Where are the voices when it's safe to do so, to speak? When you choose to be your authentic self is an act of courage. Even allies, it is an act of courage to stand up. To navigate, to learn, to influence others in a professional environment is not easy, but we also have the opportunity to gain cultural capital, to understand the environment. People will come to you. You are seen as a leader, a safe leader, a servant leader. This workforce needs diversity and inclusion. And I'm not just talking about visible minorities. I'm talking from different experiences when we look at hiring. I'm talking about different languages that you speak, because you're looking at verticals of growth. But you have to be able to market that. It gives us leverage to be at the table. And when there's an opportunity to do so, to reach across the table to another, to forge paths, to invite them to the revolution. Because influence is a skill set. It's a strength that we need to flex. It also gives us power. When we moved into tech, I want to tell you a story that I thought was so cool. COVID hit, right, in 2019. One of the things I thought was really interesting was Blue Dot. I was watching it with my partner on 60 Minutes, and I saw them featured. And Blue Dot is actually in Toronto. And it was started by Professor Dr. Karam. And I think he was at the University of Toronto at the time. A year before Blue Dot even noticed that COVID, right, and a pandemic was starting through. And it had actually come in even before the World Health Organization realized it in December of 2021. Blue Dot knew. Dr. Karam, a year before Karam, actually had veterinarians, doctors, engineers, and computing engineers all come together to fill into the machine AI, all different algorithms that could detect any kind of pathogens and trends that came up. It was diversity of experience that was able to put together to be able to detect this record of a trend coming in from Wuhan, China. This is diversity of experience that people are capitalizing on. I mean, there was a veterinarian in there. If we looked at COVID, it has changed the way every aspect of our lives has been impacted. When we look at it, the tech industry, here is the social revolution. Google's latest diversity report shows a jump in departures among women of color. Apple employees push back against returning to the office in internal letter. Over the last year, we often felt not just underheard, but at times actively ignored. Tech workers are no longer afraid to go public. Here's how they found their voices. Silicon Valley has a powerful new adversary, its own workforce. Dozens of Amazon workers protest outside Shakopee warehouse, demand time off for Muslim holiday. Even in the tech sector, we are seeing there's a war on talent. You have power to be able to say and advocate, because if you can find the uniqueness in yourself, you can reach over to the table. It's innovative. You are responding to the employee voice, your student collective voice, if you're students that are here. Listen, GM during the time, think about the idea of innovation, took volunteers and its manufacturing employees back and retrained them quickly on ventilators. Ventilators that were not powered by electricity, but air pressure because of the training that they required. And they were able to quickly turn that around and retrain people. You have to be able to be innovative when you're looking at that. Look at McKinsey had put out, we need to redefine our professional identity for a world of flux. On the right-hand side down, X-shaped, breadth, depth, diversity, and the ability to stretch into new domains beyond the basics. So diversity has become a currency in this talent economy. How are you marketing yourself as competitive for this new reality? There's a lot to think about in this, right? I want to talk to the business, all the mid-year career and the business students in there. According to behavioral science, the set of beliefs that a consumer holds about the world is a key influencer of consumer behavior. Beliefs are psychological, so they're deeply rooted. They prevent customers from logically evaluating alternatives, and thus it perpetuates existing habits or routines. This is really important. Companies that attempt to motivate behavioral change by ignoring or challenging consumers' beliefs, these have changed, are fighting an uphill battle. Remember? Remember. That's why diversity is competitive intelligence. Remember, we are in the 5th, as far as I'm concerned, industrial revolution. And a revolution has many lanes. This is the place for a revolution because it has been. This is the place for a revolution. Your web designers, because it has been. This is the place for a revolution because it has been. You imagine these lecture halls. This is the place for a revolution because it has been. This, because it is. And this, the boardroom for your mid-careers, because it is. It is the place for a revolution. I want to leave you with this, which is learning. I know we're all talking about alum, and we all think about school as important, or at least it's been drilled in us, school is important. But I'm going to tell you about it's what you take from school and what you're able to do with it. How you're able to leverage yourself in it to be innovative. Because we're in the space of a revolution. And if you are the revolution, it's a different conversation. Learning is not the accumulation of knowledge. It is the building a capability to find new possibilities in novel circumstances. Ernesto Rubik wrote this. Thank you.
Julia, thank you. I don't get speechless like you. I don't get speechless very often, but I'm just taking it all in right now. That was, I think the whole presentation could be considered a mic drop. I appreciate you sharing your experiences, and that type of creative storytelling is one of my favorite ways to do it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to put that together. I think we're ready for everybody's one of our favorite times right now in this session to open it up for Q&A. So I hope you've been writing down your questions, because this is your chance to unmute yourself and ask them, or throw them in the chat, because we are ready. Julia's ready, I can tell. Julia has the ready face on, and so do I. So if anyone has any questions, let me see it. So I may not be able to see your hand up. You could also do the hand up function. I love that there are different skin colors. And my favorite thing about the hand up function. There's claps in the chat, which I really appreciate, because I'm the same way. I feel the big claps here. Am I missing? Just gonna ask my York U team if I'm missing anything. All right, so I'm gonna kick it with one question that we have one. Sabrina. Sabrina, go ahead and unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Sabrina.
Hi there. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really love the insights, and I love York. I mean, I love how York has always been this voice. And thank you to our presenter today for sharing her insights, her experiences, the concepts that she's putting into action. I just wanted to get some more feedback maybe about how to, the technical aspect of bringing forth this voice, this unique voice of revolution into structured systems. I mean, it's all the rage right now, which is wonderful. Suddenly everyone cares. But I find that it's even often being taken over by kind of rhetoric. And you talked about bringing forth your authentic self as your power, which is an ambition, right? Which is a goal of mine. How to bring that forth so that it supersedes the rhetoric, so that it is, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the context I'm in education, I'm in business, organizations, government, I'm a bit in these industries.
Mm-hmm. I love this question, and thank you for asking it. I love the hard questions. They're interrogative, and that's really
sorry.
No, it's actually and I really like that. I mean, I can tell a good news story, right? And how people are doing things, but it's not always easy to bring oneself. It's not only an act of courage, you have to assess if there's psychological safety there. Do I feel safe enough to do so? The other thing is, do you
Right.
feel like you're the only one there? So I'm always about safe first. I've said on a panel, it was in Women in Technology for Canada, and I spoke, and I made a very big claim. And I said, it is not your responsibility to set yourself on fire to keep your company warm when it comes to D&I. I'll say it.
Right.
Write it down. Remind yourself, this is a collective. And so there are often times where we are the only one speaking. So one of the things you have to assess is, do I have allyship or sponsorship that makes it okay, that has my back? You have to assess the scenario first. That's why I'm saying I love these questions, because they're the real questions. Two is that when you see a company, a lot of companies, the difference between performative and demonstrative is rigorously looked at by the employee base. So you can be doing your pride flags and putting things up and saying great, or like we've talked about a lot, MLK Day just went. I was really mindful of what I put up there, because we have our employee resource group. We have our, it's actually Black Voices Celebrating Excellence is what they chose as their titling. I'm not going to make any but MLK Day if I'm not doing something and supporting them internally. And I have said that, and I invite you guys to follow on LinkedIn some of the posts. I had posted my very first one for 2023. What leaders should know about D&I, they ought to know by now. And that's one of those things is, are you creating the space for your talent to come forward? And I'll tell you one more thing. When you're looking to bring your authentic self, you assess if it's fair, or safe. You assess if you have a champion, an ally, right, behind you, being able to say, I got your back because I know this is something you want to do in building your culture and connecting with other employees. Is that safe and recognized as the time to do so? And then third is, what's the business? What's the gap or the business that they're feeling? Align to what the business is saying is their problem at times, right? And I'm talking in a business sense, because if it's important to them and I'm aligning, I'm going to help you retain talent, right? This is part of a little bit of the impact that D&I does. Then you're starting to create it as competitive intelligence for them. Because
I love that. I love
the
your
research is
terms.
out there that people are saying, if you don't have something diversity, I don't want to come. Or if the interview panel is only of one homogenous view or a parent view, this doesn't tell me that I was a space for me. So I'll stop there because I can go on, but I love these type of questions, that's great, Julia, sounds all good, but give me what this looks like, but assess if you have safety first.
Thank you so much, Julia. I will follow you on Instagram, and I hope you follow me back. I love making multiculturalism work.
Thanks, Sabrina, for your question. Appreciate it. I would love to dip in. I just wanted to check in. Stephanie, we had a very similar question about thoughts on companies who talk about DEI in the workplace, but then obviously don't or won't practice it. I wanted to see if Julia had already responded to that question, because I feel it was very along the same lines, same brain as what was talked about. Stephanie, let me know in the chat if you would like to expand. Otherwise, I would love to just dive into a question from Amandeep, which is quite interesting. It's a very unique question for GTA or GTHA, I believe we're calling it now. How do we market ourselves if the GTHA is quite a diverse, we're talking about 40% diversity, but in GTHA, I believe I've seen it. It's more than that. So we're a very diverse city, area, region. How do we market ourselves in this already quite diverse region? And then there's a second question, but I think I'm also very quite interested in that, because that takes a different kind of throws this on its side a little bit. So I'd love to hear your thought, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, Julia.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, is how do I become unique among a diverse set of unique, right? But I think that we have to look at the dimensions of what we talk about with diversity. So one of the things is, when I graduated from York University in philosophy, just FYI for anybody who's doing philosophy, look what I'm doing with it now. Because we got a lot of people who said, what are you going to do with philosophy? And I was like, well, I'm going to get specialized in professional ethics, and I'm going to rule the world. We're still working on the rule the world part. However, the idea was that, how do I diversify myself is incredibly important. Let's not just think about it as race, right? That's the problem we're thinking about now. I think sometimes is, oh, about race. Listen, I'm not the only brown woman of color that's going for a DEI leadership. What have I done when I have other aspects of it? I'm an immigrant, okay? And I bring that to the table. How do you bring that to the table? What are some of the things that you've done and brought along people? What are the things I did from philosophy? As I graduated, I wanted to make sure I diversified myself. I created something distinctive. So what I did was I took concurrently a certificate in professional ethics. I was already thinking about how do I make myself different? So if you're looking as a candidate, what have you done externally? I always tell my son that, who's also at York, and I'm very proud he's at York, which is what else are you looking at or doing? So if he's in business, he's taking philosophy, right? What are the other things that you've taken that you're bringing in? Do you remember that slide McKinsey put up that it said, it was the X? What is the depth and the breadth? How are you marketing everything to bring in and including, right? Your diversity of, say, race or gender or orientation or intersectionality. So it becomes quite complex, but we have to be able to do it. We can't stand only on the laurel, right, of uniqueness anyway in terms of race, because then it would be tokenism. So I know Harjo's raised his hand too. I don't want to jump the line. I just want to make sure that I know that we're seeing different things.
Yeah, we have time for one more question. Harjo, we'll take your question if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I guess my question is sort of like, so we were talking about storytelling and like, we're also talking about putting things into action, right? And I guess my question is like, how do you sort of know when it's the right time to move from one thing to the other, right? Like you need to be able to tell your story. You need for other people to hear your story, and you need to be able, it's not just about like telling your story, it's about other people receiving it as well. Like, for example, you mentioned the equality, diversity, and inclusion initiatives of various law firms. I would say that started about 3 years ago, from what I can tell, that we actually made it a requirement as a part of your continuing professional development to learn about EDI, right? And so now it's starting to show up on people's websites, but obviously there's a sort of delay about it, right? And so, you can create committees and you can talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion, but there's sort of like, and you have to be sort of careful about the action you take, because there's so many different groups, I would think, right? That like, you don't want to infringe on the equality or inadvertently discriminate against another group because you're trying to, figure out how to follow one group. Like the most obvious example I was just talking to my mom about it today, was like, how do you support, for example, J.K. Rowling's views, right, on, her particular view about, transgender kind of stuff, while simultaneously, looking at the transgender people who might, take issue with her particular view about women not, men not being able to use, transgender men not being able to use women's bathrooms and shelters and stuff like that. That's just an example of two competing groups, right? So I guess the way of what I'm like asking about is like, sort of, you're doing storytelling, you give your perspective, you give your opinion, and then the action you're supposed to take, I guess, is to just have committees and keep talking about it, right? And like I don't know if my question kind of makes sense, but do you have some thoughts on that?
What is it that makes you have a visceral reaction to something that is of injustice? Do you know what I mean by that? So the idea is that you have to know what you're saying, why you're saying it, and why you are in that fight. So we're not picking up every argument. Like J.K. Rowling would be a visceral reaction to me, because I would not be purporting something that's harmful in thought to another group. So we really you know what I mean? But I know what you're saying is there are competing views. Let's take Roe versus Wade. Let me just really kick it out. And there are some people that are saying, listen, I may not be about that. I don't believe in this, right? And so they are on this end of the spectrum. And then you have on the other side, right? Which is, so you have the pro-life, and then you actually have, right, the two sides. And you're saying, well, how do I support both? Is that what you're asking? Or are you saying, like, when do I know who to support what?
Yeah, well, I mean, on some level, I mean, okay, so let's say we're talking about equality, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace, right? Or in a profession or something
Mm.
like that, right? I'm saying that there's going, in order to be, show EDI initiatives, you might on some level be excluding, some other group or something like that. And so I guess you kind of tell your story, but you have to be respectful of other stories. I guess it kind of comes down to respect or tolerance of lots of different groups.
Okay,
And
let me, I know we're running out of time as well, but I think what you're saying is exactly right in one way. One is equity is different than equality. So I know that we've been saying equality, and I just want to divide that idea. Equity is sometimes the playing field has to be unequal, right? In order to be able, or the pendulum has to swing in order to now lift up underserved communities originally. When we pay attention to those, right? That is important because what we're doing is trying to level the playing field. And so it is important that we can't look at every single possibility, but if it is an underserved, commonly or traditionally community, paying attention to that and giving process and policy and time authentically is an important aspect of the diversity and inclusion work. It doesn't mean that this other group is not being paid attention to if they already had power, privilege, or it was on a level playing field.
Sure.
And you have to decide as either a company or this is our priority, because there is a long-standing history of underservice and unseen and invisibility. And you have to put those stakes in the ground. And some people may think that that is inequitable, but that's how equity at times is done, is to be able to say, we need to focus here. It's messy work because it was messy to begin with that we have this, right? So
the messy work. The messy work continues. We'll all be doing a cleanup job, but I really want to, as we continue the mess, please, this conversation can continue after our breakout rooms as well, in our breakout rooms too, because this is all amazing conversation. This is the whole point. The point is to create that conversation, that space for you to speak up about these amazing issues, these very important issues. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the breakouts. And you'll be paired up with 2 or 3 other fellow alum for about 5, I believe it's about 5 minutes. And then we'll be coming back to quickly do some final remarks and conclusions. And then we will stick around if you want to stick around for a few more extra minutes to continue the conversation, we can do that. So we will have you, I think you guys will be prompted to be set